Music and laughter came from below, but it was too quiet upstairs. The bedroom door was locked, and behind it, muffled laughter, whispers, and the rustle of sheets. My heart froze, my fingers tightened on the doorknob, and a terrible realization was already forming in my head. The click of the lock, the door slowly swung open, and I saw it. I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. Honestly, cheating is something that always happened on the fringes of my consciousness, with someone else in someone else's marriages. But definitely not in mine. Not with Samantha. Not with the woman I shared a bed, a home, a life with. This evening was no different. My friends and I had gathered at our house as we did every month. Samantha loved these get-togethers. She was always the center of attention, bright, charismatic, the life of the party. I admired the way she could captivate people. When she laughed, everything around her seemed to freeze. I loved that laughter. It was mine. But that evening something was wrong. I couldn't immediately put my finger on it, but I could feel it in my skin. Some kind of tension in the air, other people's glances that hid when I passed by. There was something snake-like in the smile of Dylan, my friend. I pushed these thoughts away, explaining them away as the usual paranoia caused by fatigue and alcohol. And then Samantha was gone. I didn't notice right away. We were drinking whiskey, discussing the football game, someone was telling another joke. I smiled automatically, but my thoughts had already begun to dig into the details. Samantha had just been sitting next to me, laughing, chatting with the girls. But now she was gone. Dylan, too. I stood up and, trying not to attract attention, went upstairs. I climbed the stairs and stopped in front of our bedroom door. Locked. That was the very moment when everything fell into place. I heard muffled laughter. Samantha's voice. And someone else's. Dylan's. Something inside me froze. I was betrayed. I heard the rustling of sheets, indistinct phrases, muffled groans. I felt cold. No, not jealousy. Not rage. Cold as a morgue. I stood in front of that door, and part of me wanted to just turn around and leave. Pretend it never happened. But the other part, the part that now held me in an icy daze, demanded to see it with my own eyes. I grabbed the handle and pulled. Locked. Damn, wait, I heard Dylan's muffled voice. There was the rustle of clothes. I heard them hurriedly buttoning themselves, whispering. I didn't wait. I pushed the door open with my shoulder in a sharp motion. Click. Samantha was standing in front of the bed, hurrying to button her blouse. Her cheeks were flushed, her breathing ragged. Dylan was sitting on the edge of the bed, his shirt unbuttoned, his face pale as a ghost. And in that moment I realized that everything that had been between us had just died. I looked at her in silence. She met my gaze. There was no fear or guilt in her eyes. Only irritation. Close the door, Jeremy. I was silent. Close it, she repeated coldly. I looked at her. Then at Dylan. At her bed, at the rumpled sheets. I nodded and closed forever. I left that same night. I didn't take anything with me except my keys and wallet. I even left my phone at home. I just walked out, got in the car and drove. No destination, no route, just away from this house, from her, from his scent on her skin, from everything I had once loved. I didn't know how many hours I spent behind the wheel. Several times I stopped, got out of the car, looked into the darkness and thought, what now? Anger? No. I didn't want to scream, I didn't want to smash the furniture or punch someone in the face. I felt something else. Emptiness. A freezing, endless emptiness. But the longer I sat in that emptiness, the clearer one thing became, just leaving was too easy. I saw it in her eyes when I closed the door behind me. She didn't even try to stop me. Not a shadow of fear, not the slightest worry. She was sure I was just offended. I would cool off. I would come back. And everything would be like before. No, Samantha. You don't understand. Everything has changed. On the third day, I returned home. Samantha was at work. The house was silent. I walked into the living room, looked at the couch where she sat, laughing at stupid shows. I looked into the kitchen where she made coffee in the morning, stretched out in my shirt. I went upstairs. To the bedroom. I knew what I would see there. The crumpled sheets had already been changed. But I could still feel it, the dirt that permeated the air. I didn't pack my things. Instead, I sat on the bed and began to think. How to destroy her life. For days of complete silence. I could see Samantha was nervous. She tried to pretend nothing had happened, but she was starting to feel uneasy. I didn't say a word. I didn't make a scene. I didn't ask questions. I just lived there. Like a ghost. I came home late, without explaining where I'd been. I looked at her with indifference. I spoke dryly, only to the point. Sometimes I smiled. Just enough to make her feel uneasy. I could see her trying to analyze my behavior. It infuriated her. She was used to controlling people, managing them, reading their emotions. But it didn't work with me anymore. She started to get scared. One night I got out of bed, went to the kitchen, drank some water. I came back. Samantha was pretending to be asleep. But I saw her breathing become ragged when I leaned over her. I whispered, "It's okay, honey. Sleep." Samantha always liked control. She was the kind of woman who knew what she was going to say next, how exactly someone would react, and what she had to do to get what she wanted. Manipulating, influencing, directing. She was a master at it. But now everything had changed. At first, she thought nothing terrible had happened. So what if I saw her with Dylan? So what if he left? She was sure that I was just worried, that I needed time, and that soon I would be the same Jeremy she knew. But with each passing day, her confidence melted away. She didn't know what was going on in my head, and that scared her. It all started with little things. I stopped leaving my phone in plain sight. It used to always be on the kitchen table or the nightstand by the bed. But now I carried it with me. I started coming home late. Sometimes I stayed late at work. Sometimes I just sat in the car nearby, staring into the darkness. When she called, I answered calmly but distantly. "Yes? Where are you?" "It doesn't matter. Will you be there soon?" "Maybe." And I hung up. I saw her hands shaking when she put the phone back. Then I started disappearing for the whole night. I didn't tell her where I'd been. She was afraid to ask. One day, when I came back in the morning, she was standing in the kitchen, trying to pretend to drink coffee. "Where have you been?" she finally asked. I looked at her and smiled. "Do you think I'm cheating on you?" She turned pale. No, I just, you know how it is, right?" I took a sip of water and slowly put the glass on the table. When you know but can't prove it. When you guess but they don't tell you the truth. When the person you trust acts as if you're nothing. Her fingers tightened around her mug. "Jeremy, good night, sweetheart." I walked past her, leaving her standing in that silence, full of despair. Then I began to create the feeling of surveillance. I knew her daily routine by heart. I knew when she went to the gym, when she met her friends, when she went shopping. One day, she went into the store to buy groceries. At the checkout, while paying, she opened her purse and saw something strange. A photograph, an old photo of the two of us, taken many years ago. She didn't remember putting it there. As she left the store, she looked back. Bustle, people, cars. But for a moment, she thought she saw someone standing across the street, looking straight at her. But when she blinked, there was no one. I saw her expression. I saw her quicken her pace, stuffing the photo back into her purse. Now the fear settled in her. And then things started disappearing. Not right away. Not suddenly. First her favorite lipstick, which she definitely left in the bathroom. Then her car keys, which suddenly appeared in the other pocket of her bag. She wasn't sure yet that she was going crazy, but she was already beginning to suspect. One evening, I came home earlier than usual. Samantha was sitting on the couch, quiet, hugging herself. I walked past without saying a word. "Jeremy," she called softly. I stopped and turned around. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated. Her fingers nervously tugged at the sleeve of her sweater. "Have you?" She swallowed. "Have you noticed strange things?" I looked at her a little longer than necessary, then calmly sat down opposite her. "What are you talking about?" I feel like, I don't know." "It feels like what?" She fell silent. Her breathing was ragged. I saw her fear. She couldn't explain what was happening. I leaned closer. "You don't look well, honey. Are you okay?" She nodded, quickly looking down. I stood up, patted her on the shoulder, and went into the bedroom, and left her alone with her fears. Samantha was used to controlling everything. People, emotions, situations. But now she didn't understand what was happening. Something had changed. I had changed. She saw it, felt it, but she didn't know how deep the game had gone. And I was enjoying this moment. She was no longer the confident, bold woman who, caught cheating, would only irritably order me to close the door. Now she was nervous, losing things, looking around as if someone was watching her. waking up in the middle of the night and listening to the silence. But I knew she needed to be given a piece of information, not the whole truth, just part. Enough for her to think she understood what was going on. But she didn't. I started with something simple. One evening we were sitting in the kitchen. I was drinking tea, she was picking at her plate with a fork. "You've become absent-minded," I noted. Samantha tensed. "I'm just tired." "Yeah?" I took a sip. "Or is something bothering you?" She looked up at me. "I don't know what you want from me, Jeremy." I smiled. "Do you want to know?" She froze. I slowly put the cup down, leaning my elbows on the table. "I'll tell you." She leaned forward a little. I saw fear in her eyes, but even more, a burning desire to understand. I paused. "I'm getting ready for a party." Samantha blinked. "What? You haven't forgotten? Next month is our traditional party." I shrugged slightly. "This time it will be special." She looked at me in a daze. "Special, in what sense?" I smiled. "You'll see." She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. That evening she lay awake for a long time. I could feel her tension even through the sheets. The first spark of doubt. The first hint of inevitability. I continued the game. Everything was subtle, neat. One day she found a note in her purse. "Are you ready for what's next?" Unsigned. She ran home pale as chalk, her hands shaking. I was calmly reading a book in the living room when she walked in. "Is this your doing?" I tore myself away from the page, raising my eyebrows in surprise. "What are you talking about?" She threw the note on the table. I picked it up, glanced at it, grinned, and shrugged. "Interesting. You planted this? What do you think?" I looked straight into her eyes, letting her believe that I was both yes and no at the same time. She clenched her fists, turned around, and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door loudly. I smiled. Now the fear was growing in her. A week later, I took the next step. She came home from work and the table was already set in the kitchen. Wine, candles, her favorite dishes. Samantha froze in the doorway. "What? What is this?" I smiled. "Just dinner." She sat down carefully opposite me. She took the glass, but did not drink. "You're acting strange," she said. "Why?" She twirled the glass in her fingers, looking at me warily. "All this. You suddenly started setting the table for dinner, leaving me strange notes, hinting at a party." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Do you feel like you're losing control?" She didn't answer. I picked up a fork and cut off a piece of meat. "It's an unpleasant feeling, isn't it?" She remained silent. "You know, I've been thinking a lot. About what happened. About you. About Dylan." She shuddered at his name. I chuckled. "You don't even know where he is now, do you?" She pressed her lips together. "We haven't talked." "That's funny," I said, calmly chewing a piece of meat. "Neither have we." She looked up. "What are you trying to say?" I leaned toward her slowly. "You'll see, honey." She didn't touch her food. I finished my portion, stood up, and leaned towards her ear as I passed. Until the evening. Samantha did not yet understand the full depth of what she had gotten herself into. Her fears were growing, but for now she still hoped that these were just my games. Just punishment. But soon she would understand that there was no way out. And then fear would consume her completely. I started with Dylan. After that night, he disappeared. I knew why. He wasn't like Samantha. He couldn't hide his emotions. He was afraid. And rightly so. He avoided me, avoided talking to me, even quit his job and moved to a different neighborhood. I didn't look for him. I knew he'd show up. All it took was one call. Dylan was sitting in a cheap diner, nervously twirling his coffee. I watched him from behind the glass before walking in. When I sat down across from him, he froze. "Long time no see," I said calmly. He swallowed. "Jeremy." "Dude. Look, I'm sorry. Honestly. I was an idiot. It was a mistake." I smiled. "A mistake?" "Yeah, a mistake," he rattled off quickly. "I was drunk and so was Samantha. It shouldn't have happened." I looked at him, enjoying his panic. "But it happened." Dylan swallowed. "Yeah." I leaned closer. "Do you think Samantha misses you?" He blinked, startled. What? You haven't seen her since that night, right?" He looked away. "No." I sighed and shook my head. "You know what's most interesting?" I paused, watching his reaction. "She didn't try to find you either." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" I chuckled. "She just erased you from her life, Dylan. While you're running around like a scared rabbit, she's moving on. Sleeping in our bed. Drinking coffee in our kitchen. Meeting friends who don't even know where you are." I could see him gritting his teeth. "She's scared too," I continued. I saw it in her eyes. I saw her searching for answers. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo. It was from yesterday, Samantha sitting in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her eyes empty and tired. I set the phone on the table in front of him. She's going to break, Dylan. The only question is if you'll be there to see it. He was silent. I stood up. Meet her. He looked up. What? Tell her you're scared. That you think I'm following you. See how she reacts. Dylan hesitated. I leaned over and patted him on the shoulder. You want to know what's going on too, right? And I left him with that thought. The meeting was 3 days later. I knew where and when. I knew what Dylan would say. I watched them from the car. Samantha was tense, her fingers nervously clenching her coffee cup. Dylan leaned toward her, talking to her, almost in a whisper. She listened. And then I saw her hand shaking. She went pale. I knew what he'd told her. Samantha. He's been playing with us. All this time. She shook her head quickly. No. No, it's just coincidences. No, damn it, he interrupted sharply. It's not coincidences. He's up to something. I know it. She pressed her lips together. Dylan. Are you sure he's not trying to get back at you? Are you sure that you're even safe? She stood up. I have to go. Samantha. But she was already leaving. I saw her face when she left the cafe. She glanced around nervously as if she were afraid someone was following her. I smiled. Now she's not only afraid of me. Now she doesn't know who to trust. Later that evening she walked into the house. There was fear in her eyes. I was sitting in the living room, drinking whiskey. She paused in the doorway. You said the party would be special. I looked up. Yes. What are you planning? I took a sip, enjoying the pause. Can't you guess? Her breathing was ragged. I put my glass down and stood up, slowly walking toward her. Dylan said something to you, didn't he? She bit her lip. I leaned closer. He thinks I want revenge, right? She swallowed hard. Is that so? I looked her straight in the eyes. You'll see. And I walked past, leaving her in this icy unknown. Fear isn't just an emotion. It's a virus. It gets into your head, grows, fills your consciousness, distorts your reality. Samantha was already afraid. She didn't know what I was planning, but she felt something terrible coming. But that wasn't enough. I had to make sure she knew I was in control. I had to leave her a sign. Something clear, something undeniable, something that would make her stop looking for explanations and understand that there was no way out. In the morning I made breakfast. Avocado toast, coffee with almond milk, everything she liked. Samantha came downstairs, slowly, cautiously. She stopped at the kitchen door, looking around at the table as if she was afraid that the food might be poisonous. What? What is it? I looked up and smiled. Breakfast. She didn't move. She just looked at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. Why are you doing this? What exactly? She nervously ran her hand through her hair and shook her head. These strange conversations, notes, dinner. The party. I took a fork, cut off a piece of toast, chewed slowly, not taking my eyes off her. You already guessed. Her face turned pale. I leaned closer, feeling her tension. You understand that I won't just leave this like this. She swallowed convulsively. I slowly reached for her hand, lightly ran my fingers along her wrist. She jerked, pulled my palm away. I smiled. Don't worry, honey. You don't have to guess what will happen next. I stood up from the table, took out my phone, and took a few steps toward the door. Spend the day as usual. She pressed her lips together, her hands shaking. Why? I gave her a calm, confident look. Because when you get home, you'll understand everything. And I left. Samantha went to work, but her thoughts stayed with me. I knew it. She couldn't concentrate, couldn't shake off the anxious anticipation. What was I planning? What awaited her? And I was already preparing. When she returned home, her face spoke for itself. She stepped inside, froze in the hallway. Something was wrong. I was sitting in the living room, casually scrolling through my phone. She walked slowly through the house. The kitchen was clean. The living room was all there. She went upstairs. I heard her footsteps. And then silence. Coffin-like. I stood up slowly and followed her in no hurry. Samantha stood in the doorway of our bedroom. Pale. Trembling. Her gaze was fixed on the bed. On the sheets. White, perfectly ironed. And stained with dark red streaks. Blood. Not real, of course. I bought it at a special effects store. But it looked realistic. Very. There was a note on the pillow. Everything is coming back. Are you ready? I came closer, watching her reaction. Her breathing was intermittent, convulsive, her skin turned almost white. You're crazy. I grinned. Maybe. She turned and ran into the bathroom. I heard her splashing water on her face, her breathing getting ragged, her fingers convulsively clinging to the sink. Now she knew. I wasn't just mad. I was planning. Which meant the worst was yet to come. Samantha wasn't trying to pretend everything was okay anymore. I could see it in her eyes, in her movements, in the way she pursed her lips when she thought I wasn't looking. She wasn't in control anymore. I was in control. But it wasn't enough. Her reputation was what I was going to destroy. I started small. The next day, I surprised her. The party's this week, I announced over breakfast. Samantha looked up at me, confused. What? Yeah, I took a sip of coffee. You don't mind, right? She swallowed. Jeremy, are you serious? Of course. Everyone will be here. Like always. She froze. I could see her trying to figure out, was this a trap? I smiled. You like being the center of attention, right? She didn't answer. But I could already see the fear in her eyes. She guessed. The party went exactly as I had planned. All our friends had gathered at our house. Music, conversations, laughter. Samantha tried to act natural, but I saw her eyes darting around the room, her fingers shaking as she raised her glass to her lips. She was waiting for the blow. And I delivered it at the most unexpected moment. I stood in the middle of the room, drawing attention to myself. Friends, I said, raising my glass. Thank you for coming. Tonight is a special evening. Everyone fell silent, looking at me. Samantha tensed, her eyes widened. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Then I looked straight at her. Let's drink to sincerity. She shuddered. I paused, then turned to the guests. For a long time, I thought that the most important thing in marriage was trust. Honesty. Loyalty. I looked at Samantha. But it turns out that some people see things differently. She turned pale. Someone shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. I slowly pulled my phone out of my pocket and scrolled down. Sometimes the truth comes out in the most unexpected ways. Like when you find someone else's photos in your wife's phone. I pressed the button. The TV on the wall lit up with an image. Samantha that night. The rumpled bed. The flushed face. Dylan sitting on the bed next to her. A muffled whisper filled the room. I heard someone gasp. Dylan wasn't at the party, he'd wisely decided not to show up. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was that everyone knew. I looked at Samantha. She was staring at the screen, her eyes wide, barely breathing. Her world was crumbling before her eyes. I smiled. Let's drink to honesty, dear. She took a deep breath, shaking her head. Jeremy? No. It's not what you think. But it was too late. One of her friends covered her mouth, looking at her in shock. Samantha. Is it true? Samantha opened her mouth but found no words. Some chuckled, some shook their heads in disdain. Her friends turned away one by one. Her life had fallen apart in a minute. She looked at me with horror. But I only looked at her. Did you think I would just leave? No, Samantha. I wanted you to feel what I felt. Losing the pain and emptiness. Now you know. I watched her world crumble before her eyes. Everyone had turned away from her, friends, acquaintances, people in front of whom she had always played the role of the perfect wife, the woman they envied, who they looked up to. Now they looked at her differently. With disgust. With contempt. With pity. Samantha was breathing heavily, her hands were shaking. She looked around the room, trying to find support, but no one was in a hurry to stand up for her. Her best friends looked away. One of the guys who always flirted with her smirked and turned away. Even her own sister, standing in the corner, shook her head, her lips pressed together in disappointment. Samantha was alone now. Jeremy, her voice was shaking. Please. Let's talk. I calmly put the glass on the table. About what? She swallowed, desperately searching for words. It's not what you think. I chuckled. No, Samantha. That's exactly what I think. She tried to take a step towards me, but I moved away. I just... It was a mistake, she spoke faster, her voice shaking. A stupid, terrible mistake. I don't know what came over me. I nodded, crossing my arms over my chest. So it was a mistake? Yes. She seized the chance, her eyes filled with hope. I love you, Jeremy. I never wanted to lose you. I leaned closer. You've already lost me. Her face twisted in pain. I looked at the guests. They were silent, some were whispering, some were already getting ready to leave, realizing that there was nothing more to do here. But I wasn't finished. I took out my phone again, pressed a couple of buttons and started recording. Samantha's voice. Close the door, Jeremy. The room froze. Those were her words. Said that night. Said without a drop of guilt, without regret, without fear, without shame. Samantha went pale. Jeremy. I turned off the recording. You didn't even try to stop me then. You didn't try to explain yourself. You just told me to leave. She sniffled. I was in shock. I nodded. Now you know what it's like. She took a step back. The guests began to leave. Some glanced at her sympathetically, but no one said a word in her defense. She was left standing alone in the middle of the room. Alone. Devastated and crushed. I looked at her one last time. The party's over. And I walked out, leaving her in that silence. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. If you liked the story, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm show my content more often. If you are new to the channel, do not forget to hit that subscribe button. It really helps me keep making more stories for you.